In 1277, Pope Nicholas III rebuilt the papal chapel, which had been destroyed by fire, and decorated it with paintings, precious stone revetments, and sumptuous mosaics. The chapel was called the Sancta Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies, because of its precious relics, which pilgrims still come to venerate. They climb the 28 steps of the Scala Sancta, the holy stairs, on their knees. Inside is the most famous icon in Rome. It is a full-length image of Christ, painted on canvas mounted on wood, now thought by scholars to date around 600 AD. Covered since the 13th century with a silver casing, only its repainted face is now visible. This is a powerful image, haunting in its directness, and it was believed in the Middle Ages to be a miraculous one. The painting, it was said, was begun by the evangelist Luke, but completed by an angel. The most popular so-called true likeness in the West was preserved not far away at the Vatican in St. Peter's. It became an object of intense devotion in the later Middle Ages. This was the sudarium, meaning literally sweat cloth, also known as the veil of Veronica, or simply the Veronica. The story surrounding it tells of a woman who received from Christ a miraculous imprint of his face. It was said to have the power to cure people who looked upon it. This woman came to be called Veronica, her very name meaning true image. According to the most popular version of the story, which emerged around 1300, Veronica wiped the face of Christ on his way to Calvary, out of compassion. His image remained imprinted on her cloth. In 1216, Pope Innocent III introduced a special prayer addressed to the Holy Face, the first of many such prayers and hymns recited for centuries. Innocent and his successors granted spiritual benefits for those who said the prayer in front of the veil. A miniature in a manuscript shows Pope Sixtus IV displaying the Veronica to pilgrims in the Jubilee year of 1475. The fame of the Veronica began to spread throughout the West. Pilgrims flocked to Rome to see this likeness of the face they hoped to gaze upon in heaven. Gazing on the image, the believer could have a face-to-face encounter with the Lord. Artists in the Western Church, unlike those in the East, did not feel bound to copy an image, no matter how miraculous. They improvised and showed Jesus in many variations. The unknown German artist who painted this panel about 1400, called the Master of St. Veronica, showed the kneeling Veronica holding an oversized image of the triumphant Christ in ideal beauty. The same artist painted this panel. Here, the Christ on Veronica's veil is a man of sorrows, bearing the crown of thorns, beaten and bleeding, suffering for the sins of humankind.
Scenes of Christ's suffering and death were rare in early Christian art. The cedar wood doors of Santa Sabina in Rome are an astonishing survival from the 5th century. The carved crucifixion scene shows for the first time Christ between two thieves, Strangely, the crosses have been omitted. Only the figures with outstretched arms and nails in their hands can be seen. The bearded head of Christ defies death with open eyes. During the later Middle Ages, Northern Europe was swept by a devotional fervor focused on the passion of Jesus Christ, intent on re-experiencing the sufferings that culminated in his sacrificial death on the cross. Artists such as Hieronymus Bosch became preoccupied with representing the gruesome horror and psychic tragedy of this central event in the narrative of Christ's life. Between approximately 1300 and 1500, Jesus' humanity was made emphatically present to the viewer in the vivid depiction of his suffering and death. Many Northern European sculptures and paintings of Christ's Passion are not easy for today's viewers to look at, let alone comprehend. Some are deeply disturbing. One of the most celebrated images of Christ's Passion is in the monumental altarpiece of Matthias Grunwald, painted for a hospital dedicated to St. Anthony of Egypt in the Alsatian town of Isenheim. Grunwald's altarpiece has the crucifixion as the centerpiece of a vast and complex composition, teeming with a multitude of strange images and figures. It was viewed by victims of a disease known as St. Anthony's fire, which plagued the afflicted with raging sores on their body. St. Anthony is tormented by demons that lift him up into the air, punching and kicking him, pulling his hair and beard. But Grunwald reserved the most extreme suffering for Christ on the cross. A 19th century visitor wrote, "Grunwald strikes you dumb with the fearsome nightmare of a cavalry. It is as if a typhoon of art had been let loose and was sweeping you away, and you need a few minutes to recover from the impact, to surmount the impression of awful horror made by the huge crucified Christ." And following this terrible image comes the promise of resurrection. In a flash of mystical power, the Son of God is transformed, cured, made whole, and so too would all who believe in him be healed. Christ is radiant in a starry sky, a beacon of hope for those left suffering on earth. Artists in the 14th century began to represent the so-called weapons, the instruments of the Passion, known as the Arma Christi. Among them, the column against which Christ was tied, the flail and branches with which he was beaten, hands that had struck him, the crown of thorns, the hammer and nails that had fixed him to the cross, the lance that had pierced his side. Many devotional works were very small, meant to be held, to be viewed from close by. Albrecht Dührer's Man of Sorrows from 1511 was published with a devotional poem addressed to the viewer in Christ's voice. He begs for an end to the pain inflicted by the sins that stab him, the guilty acts that flog him, causing cruel torment. This kind of devotional art was based on the premise that the humanity of Jesus in pain could be pictured artistically, and that
the lion of